folks, how's it going? Rome Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be going over the Arms Warrior for Cataclysm. So starting out with some of the pros here for Arms Warrior, we're really good in all damage profiles. We're great in single target. We are great in AOE. We're pretty tanky for a melee DPS. We have a lot of health. We wear plate armor, so we're able to sustain through a lot of high damage phases. We have a really fun rotation as well. So this can kind of be a pro or a con depending on how you look at it. Some people like a simple rotation. Some people like a more difficult and engaging rotation. It's a pro to me, but it will require a little bit of attention to pull it off correctly. We also have really good mobility through our leaps and our charges. And then, of course, some of the main reasons to bring in Arms Warrior is going to be to the debuffs that we bring. So Blood Frenzy for that increased physical damage to the raid. Sunder Armor Stacks for the reduced armor on the raid boss, and then Rallying Cry for the increased health pool. Now, we do have some cons, of course. There is some RNG and some of our abilities, something like Sudden Death, for example, where you're trying to get a reset on that Colossus Smash. It's simply RNG, so it can feel really bad if you don't get a proc for a while. And then we also have certain rotational restrictions on mobility fights. So if there's a fight where you have to move around a lot, we have Slam, and Slam is a cast time, unfortunately. So it can be difficult to kind of pull it off in phases where you have to move around a lot. And then another thing that's a con that I didn't list here below is that we're very reliant on our weapons. So if you go a long time without getting a good two-hand weapon, it's really going to affect your DPS because a lot of our abilities are affected by that base damage on the weapon and that weapon damage. So Arms Warrior definitely has some gear requirements in order to be able to do the top DPS. We're one of those specs that really scale as we get more and more gear. All right, so just kind of an overview of Arms Warrior in Kata. Stance dancing does become a very core part of our rotation. We gain a lot of burst in both single target and AoE, and for the first time, Arms actually outmatches Fury in a pure DPS role. So Arms is really good, but it requires skill to play, and it also requires the gear to get to the top end of the meters as well. Then some changes down here at the bottom that do affect Arms Warrior is Armor Pen was changed, so Armor Penetration is no longer a stat, and then Mastery as well. So our Mastery is Strikes of Opportunity, and this is going to increase our chance to perform an extra swing by 2.2% per point of Mastery. Then we also have a few changes to our abilities, right? So Berserker Stance now increases the damage dealt by 10%, and it no longer increases damage taken. Then for Battle Shout, it no longer increases attack power and instead increases the damage dealt by 5%. Then for Stance Mastery, we are now retaining 25 Rage baseline between stance changes, up from 10. Then a few changes here for Heroic Strike and Cleave. These are no longer on next attack abilities, converting from your next swing, and these now also share a 3-second global cooldown. Battle Shout and Commanding Shout now generate 20 Rage on a 1-minute cooldown. Sunder Armor only stacks at 3 times at 4% per stack. Intercept stun duration reduced to 1.5 seconds. Pummel no longer requires Berserker Stance. And then finally, Victory Rush now heals for 20% of maximum health. Okay, now moving on to stats, starting with Expertise here. This is going to be very valuable to us, and this is going to increase the chance for your attacks to be successful. So these are going to reduce the chance that your attacks are dodged or parried. So you're going to want 14% unless you have a certain specialization with your race, such as like a sword specialization, axe, or something like a mage specialization. If you have one of those, then your cap's going to be 13.25%. So for hit rating, we're going to want to get that to 8%. Then after Expertise and Hit, you really want to be focusing on Strength, which is just going to kind of come universally with gear, and then Critical Strike rating. Now, one thing that really trumps all of this is your weapon's damage. So if you get a weapon with a very high base weapon damage, that's something that you want to prioritize over all these stats here, because that's where most of our damage is going to come from. So just know that once you hit this Expertise and Hit rating caps, you will want to be reforging and gemming your gear towards Strength and Critical Strike rating. So for a single target rotation, you're going to have to get a little bit comfortable with stance swapping for our overpower here in step 4. So the goal of what we're trying to do here is use our Taste for Blood procs with overpower. Now the problem with this is that overpower requires us to be in battle stance, which is why we have to stance swap to use it. So when we do stance swap to battle stance, the only ability we're going to be using is overpower. So after you use overpower, then you're going to immediately swap back to berserker stance. So overall, what you're looking to do is you're looking to stay in berserker stance for 8 to 9 seconds, swap to battle stance, use your overpowers, then swap back to berserker stance. Now, one thing you do need to be careful of is when you are swapping stances, you're only going to retain 75 rage from your talents. So anything above 75 rage you want to use and make sure that you're spending it before you actually swap your stances. So what you're looking at here is more of a priority list. I know I have it labeled as rotation, but this is what you're going to want to be focusing on. So you want to focus first on always having rend up on your target. You want to Mortal Strike on cooldown, and then you also want to Colossus Smash on cooldown. Now from here, if you do get a Taste for Blood proc, you want to swap to battle stance. You want to use those procs, then you want to swap back into your berserker stance and continue with this priority list here. We'll be using Heroic Leap on cooldown, and then Heroic Strike whenever we get very high on rage. And we can also use this with our Battle Trance procs, which we will talk about here shortly. We also have Execute, right? You're going to be using that when they are below 20% health. You can also Slam if Heroic Strike is on cooldown and everything else is on cooldown as well. You can use Slam kind of as a filler as well. This does have a cast time, so just keep that in mind. If it's a high movement phase, this is going to be kind of hard to pull off. And then finally, you can use Commanding Shout for additional rage. Okay, for our AOE rotation at 2 targets, you're just going to simply follow what we just did in the single target rotation, except for Sweeping Strikes. You're going to be using that on cooldown, and you're going to replace your Heroic Strike with Cleave. Then for 3 and 4 targets here, it looks kind of confusing, but it's really not. They're the exact same thing, except for step 6. So at 3 targets, you will be using Colossus Smash, and at 4+ targets, you will be using Whirlwind. So a Rend into a Thunderclap, into a Blade Storm, into Sweeping Strikes, a Mortal Strike, Whirlwind, Overpower, and Cleave. This will be your priority list. So for talents, not a ton of room for movement. We're pretty much going to be stuck with this build. But I do have 4 talents over here on the right-hand side that I think you should be aware of. So the first one here is Tactical Mastery. So retain up to an additional 50 rage on top of the 25 rage base. So you'll be retaining 75 rage when you change stances. So anything above that 75 rage threshold will be lost. So you want to make sure that you are spending it when you do swap stances. We have Taste for Blood here. So increases your overpower critical strike chance by 60%. In addition, whenever your Rend ability causes damage, you have a 100% chance of allowing the use of overpower for 9 seconds. So when you are stance swapping, this is what you're looking for. You're looking for Taste for Blood procs so that you can use your overpower ability. We have Lambs to the Slaughter here. So your Mortal Strike causes the slaughter effect, which refreshes the duration of Rend on the target and increases the damage of your Execute, Overpower, Slam, and Mortal Strike by 10%. This lasts for 15 seconds. Then finally here at the very bottom, we have Battle Trance. So your Bloodthirst, Mortal Strike, and Shield Slam hits have a 15% chance to make your next special attack that costs more than 5 rage consume no rage. So for Battle Trance, we're going to want to pair this up with Heroic Strike because that is a very hard-hitting ability, and at the same time, it costs a lot of rage. It's the most efficient ability to use this proc with. So this is something you're going to want to be tracking as well with Taste for Blood. Okay, for Glyphs, this is what we're going to be running, and they're all pretty basic. They just increase the damage of that respective spell by 5 to 10%. So these are all very straightforward, just a % of damage increase. Going into major glyphs here, we have Glyph of Sweeping Strikes. So this is going to remove the rage cost of Sweeping Strikes. We also have Glyph of Cleaving here. So this makes Cleave hit 3 targets. So you're going to use this for trash and, bosses with multiple targets. We also have Glyph of Colossus Smash to apply a stack of Sunder armor. So if you're responsible for keeping it up Sunder, this is something that's pretty nice to run. A few other glyphs that aren't on this list. We have Glyph of Heroic Throw and Glyph of Thunderclap. The Heroic Throw applies a stack of Sunder Armor, and then the Thunderclap just increases the radius of Thunderclap by 2 yards. So really good for AoEing trash. Then for minor glyphs, we got Glyph of Berserking Rage, Glyph of Command, and Glyph of Sundering. Then these are going to be some of the gems and enchants that we are running. One thing to note on your meta gem here, you want to make sure that you meet the requirements for this to be active. So for our Shadow Spirit Diamond here, you're going to need 3 red gems for this meta slot to become active. And you're typically going to want to gem as much strength as you possibly can. And you want to avoid any socket bonuses if they offer less than 10 strength or 20 crit or mastery. So when it comes to gems here, just know strength over crit over mastery. One thing to also note here in the enchants, some of these enchants require a specific profession. So if you're not that profession, just go to the next one in the list. So for example, on the back here, we have the Sword Guard Embroidery, requires tailoring. If you're not a tailor, then you will go to Greater Critical Strike. For your consumables, you will always be using the 90 strength during kata, with a few different options that you can pick from. So it could be any of these 3. They all give the same 90 strength. You're just going to go for the cheapest one on the auction house. For our flask, we're going to be running the Flask of Titanic Strength. This is going to give us 300 strength for 1 hour. So you want to make sure that you're picking up one of those. And then for our potion, we're doing the Golem Blood Potion. So you can pop this just a couple seconds pre-pull. And then also while you're in combat, this is going to give it 1200 strength for 25 seconds. It's on a 1-minute cooldown. All right, guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you all in the next one.